So, a lot of the discussion surrounding the Universal parks as of late has been about Nintendo, and I thought it'd be fun to just throw my own thoughts into the mix, mainly just speculating and imagining what I think further collaborations could look like. So this is going to be a bit of something different for here, since this is entirely scripted, but I'm going to just try and do this in one take and see where we go. It's 1:20 in the morning. I should not be doing this right now, but whatever, I feel like rambling. So before we go into any speculation and stuff like that, let's quickly run down on what's already been built and what's already being built. Super Nintendo World, which is the Yoshi Omnimover attraction and the Mario Kart Dark Ride in Super Mario 3D World-esque courtyard area. That opened in Universal Japan in March of 2021. It then opened at a smaller scale, it only had Mario Kart, in February 2023 at Universal Hollywood. Universal Japan opened their Phase 2, which is the new Donkey Kong Country land with the minecart coaster, in the December of 2024, and then the Orlando Resort, they got both the full Super Nintendo World with Donkey Kong and the Mario stuff when Epic Universe opened in May of 2025. And Singapore is getting, it seems like they're getting just the courtyard and the Mario Kart ride. They're not getting Yoshi, just like how Hollywood did. And that'll open there whenever it gets built. I've seen some people say as late as 2029. So Mario and Donkey Kong, they're already pretty prominent in the parks. All the current Universal resorts are gonna have it, except for Beijing, which, if you ask me, that's probably not gonna happen, considering, from what I've heard and people discussing, Nintendo they thought about it for Beijing, but it ended up becoming the Kung Fu Panda area. That whole thing, just because Nintendo and like console gaming kind of has a weird history in China. So I think that's going to get skipped out on. And Universal UK, current concept art doesn't show Nintendo, but I think plans are early enough there that it could change. It could come as a Phase 2. Who knows? Just a little bit ago, this was maybe a couple weeks ago, we got an official announcement from Universal and the Pokemon Company. They announced that a new experience is coming to Universal Japan, and later it's going to come to other resorts. Now, Universal Japan already has Pokemon in the parks. They're a part of the parade, I believe, and I'm not exactly sure what else there is, but there's already been a Pokemon presence there. And something else new is coming. To be clear, this has nothing to do with Pokepark Kanto. You might have heard about that. That just opened at Yomiuri Land in Tokyo. That has nothing to do with this project. It's nothing Universal related. These are completely separate things. That's pretty much all we know for concrete details. So, let's get into some speculation and, admittedly, some wishful thinking. Starting with Pokemon, because it's kind of already been announced, and current rumors point to it being in the former Spider-Man ride, which Universal Japan closed 2 years ago to the day before they put out that announcement about Pokemon. Which, I know that's almost certainly a coincidence, but honestly, if it's not going in that space, I don't know where else it's gonna go in that park. It is the only thing that makes sense, it feels. So, for the ride itself, let's just assume it's going in that building, because, frankly, if it's not going in that building, it's not gonna open for a while. It's an interesting spot, because they've got the Spider-Man ride in there. That ride system, with, like, the scoop vehicles, I'll call it just the scoop ride system. they could either keep that, or they could do something completely new in the room. They could gut the building and do something else. Personally, I feel that the scoop system feels a little less child-friendly. It feels a little more like it's a little more thrilling take on a dark ride. Now, the only evidence I have to support that is Spider-Man at Islands of Adventure. That's got a 40-inch height requirement. Yoshi has a 34-inch height requirement. So it's a little less accommodating to younger guests, which I think a Pokemon area would probably want to appeal to. But if they're gonna keep the scoops, to me, the only thing that really makes sense for that would be Detective Pikachu. Because it's a little more... It's slightly more, maybe, mature than I think just, like, the mainline Pokemon. And I feel like you could do something with the scoops and Detective Pikachu that could be cool. And maybe there's a possibility Universal Japan would be okay with a Pokemon ride targeted to a slightly older audience. Because the park already has, they've already got the Mario and stuff. They've got Universal Wonderland, I think it's called. That's got a bunch of properties and rides that could appeal to a younger demographic. They've got the Minion Land right nearby. Maybe they'd be okay with that. And having a Pokemon ride that, well, the land itself would be anyone, obviously. The ride itself might be a little higher of a height requirement and an age requirement, but I think Detective Pikachu is really unlikely. The movie came out in 2019, and if the sequel's ever gonna come out, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's anytime soon, so it's not like a Detective Pikachu ride's gonna tie into, like, a relevant film. It's not like a Detective Pikachu 2 is gonna come out in theaters. These will not coexist at the same time. And the second game, that was in 2023, I think, just kind of bombed. So I think it is just far more likely that they're gonna build a new ride system in that building. They're gonna do something completely new, and I think it's gonna be something that's more about sightseeing and being a little more kid-friendly, and one that can be easily cloned into the other parks. And I know that this concept has been said to death. I know everyone has said this, but a Pokemon Snap-based Omni-Mover attraction just feels like such a perfect fit for Pokemon to me. If you look at the vehicles from New Pokemon Snap, and even the original Pokemon Snap, they just look like... They remind me, like, shape-wise, of, like, Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin vehicles. It just feels so perfect that you could have a train of those going around, and you've got some interactive cameras on there that you can take photos of Pokemon with. It just feels perfect. And I know we already have the interactive Mario Kart ride, but I think these big e-ticket Nintendo rides, for these two franchises specifically, it just makes so much sense. It's a match made in heaven, because we're adapting video games, and having this game element to them just feels so obvious to me. It feels like such a perfect fit. So, just to kind of brainstorm some ideas, what I think we could do here with this sort of attraction. I think maybe you have like an outdoor, almost like Viridian Forest type queue that would then, you'd go inside Professor Oak's lab, and I think it would be Professor Oak, not the new guy from New Pokemon Snap, just because, I mean, one, let's be real, they're gonna nostalgia pander to older generations of Pokemon if this is the thing they're gonna do. They're gonna include a lot of Pokemon from, like, the first generation. You're gonna see a lot of those guys because they're popular. And I think Professor Oak is just the most well-known Pokemon professor, and he was the guy in the original Pokemon Snap. I think it would fit really well, and I think most people would prefer it, even if they aren't big fans of the first generation Pokemon. I just think Professor Oak is really recognizable. I lingered way too long on, like, a single element of that, but I think, like, Professor Oak, at some point, once you get towards the end of the lab, he'd be on a screen, or maybe an animatronic, and he'd explain how the game works, what the goal is, maybe why you're doing this Pokemon research, that sort of thing. And then, you know, you'd maybe go... At that point, I think you'd go into the loading dock, and you'd board your vehicles, and you would traverse through just a lot of environments where you expect Pokemon to be. And I hope that this would be done mainly with, like, a lot of, like, animated figures of Pokemon, primarily. I think that there will be screen elements. I could see, like, having, like, projected screen elements of, like, Pokemon flying by, or that sort of thing. I think there will be some screen elements just to add more things going on, but I hope that there's going to be a lot of physical figures and some wow moments that aren't just done on a screen. And I think doing primarily, you know, actual animated figures, you would be able to differentiate it from VillainCon Minion Blast, which is all screen-based. I think it would make those two rides, which are kind of similar. You know, you'd be sitting down for this one, you wouldn't be looking at screens. I think it'd help differentiate the two. I could see the ride vehicles traveling through something that kind of resembles what you'd think, like, Route 1 would look like. You get those sorts of Pokemon. You'd go into a forest, maybe the vehicles could travel down a river, you'd go into a cave, like a deserty crag sort of location, like an area filled with snow, and I would love to see scenes that, like, take place underwater or up in the sky. I think those could be big wow moments, like having Pokemon swim all around you, or Pokemon flying around you. I think those could be really, really cool moments. And I think the ride's, like, final sequence would have to be that you encounter some sort of legendary Pokemon. In my mind, that's potentially Mew, just because it's a very... You know, you gotta... I think Mew is fairly recognizable enough to be like, oh, this is an important Pokemon, this is an important moment. I could see a lot of other legendary Pokemon taking that place. Maybe it's a screen, and it's, like, projected onto something, and when you see the legendary Pokemon, you know, it's random every time. Well, if it's I guess if it's an Omnimover, it'd be hard to have a different experience for each group passing through, but something like that, you know. I could see maybe there's a variety of different legendary Pokemon you can encounter, or they just have one, you know, really cool moment where you see a legendary Pokemon. I think, like, you've got these Omnimovers where you can have, like, the onboard audio on them. I think it could be cool if Professor Oak was giving the kind of, like, comments that, you know, you're playing new Pokemon Snap, and, like, the professor and the other character, I don't remember her name, they, like, comment on the things that are happening around you and can, like, direct you to where you're supposed to look and can help explain what you're seeing. I think that would be a good element to, one, make it feel a little more like Pokemon Snap, as well as helping guests who aren't as experienced with Pokemon as a series understand better what's going on and know what moments are supposed to be important. Because, you know, Pokemon might be extremely popular, but there's going to be people who don't know. And I think that sort of thing would help make the ride more accessible to everyone. And once you're finished, I think it would be cool if maybe, you know, those kiosks where you could actually print off your Pokemon Snap pictures? It'd be cool if, for this ride, there was some way to get, like, physical copies of some of your photos. Or you'd be able to, like, view them on, like, a mobile app. afterwards. I think there's got to be something where you can look at the photos that you took after the ride is done. I'm not sure how that would work, but I think it would be really cool and make it really feel like, you know, you actually did Pokemon Snap. I have another idea. This is like the first idea that I thought of when I thought of a Pokemon ride. And this is far less likely, but I would love to see a suspended powered coaster. The same kind of thing as Jurassic Flyers, which is at Universal Beijing, or Arthur at Europa Park. One that has like an outdoor segment, again, just like Arthur, where you're like above the land, looking over part of it, and then you go inside and just go past various show scenes with Pokemon just doing their thing. I think that could be a really, really cool experience, and it could bring a ride that doesn't really exist in that style in North America. You know, you've got that one in China, you've got Europe. I think there are more of them out there. I think another one's being built, but you don't really have an experience just like that. And I think it would be very cool, but I think it's really unlikely to happen. I just think something interactive, something a little simpler makes more sense. So that's the ride. But I think Pokemon is absolutely going to have a land around it. I don't think it'll be a super big land. As popular as Pokemon is, I think you can get what you need to get done in a relatively small space. I think we're not going to see a theme. It's not going to be based on a specific city from any of the Pokemon games, I think. I think you're going to see something a bit more general. Maybe they'll create a new city that you're wandering around in. They'll give it like a new name, or that sort of thing. I think it's a pretty solid bet that we would see something like a Generation 3 or 4 style Pokemon Center and Pokemart, which is very similar to what exists in Pokepark Kanto. The Pokemart, obviously, that's going to be a big gift shop. I think it would be the land's like major gift shop. And I think the Pokemon Center, to me, I like the idea of that being a quick service dining location. Because, you know, you're kind of taking a break, you're recharging. It has the right vibe to me. And for the food that you could have in this land, recently we've had a lot of Pokemon games have like almost like a signature food gimmick. You've got like donuts, sandwiches, and curry from the more recent games. And then going a little bit back, you've got stuff like Poffins and Pokeblocks. And the entire series has always had berries. There are so many different Pokemon berries that I think you could base food items off of. You could have a snack stand that serves something like the Gastelia cone and the other regional specialties. I think, like, food options, there is so much to work off of with Pokemon. To do food that's really, like, built off and inspired of the stuff that comes straight from the games and not just... I think you can do a little bit of mix of that, of stuff that's, like, you know, taking the food from the games into real life and just creating, like, original dishes that are just inspired by Pokemon. You know, like that sort of thing. I think there's a lot of that you could do. I kind of love the idea of them selling, like, a rice ball and just calling it a jelly-filled donut. And just really hoping that people get the joke. I think that would be really funny. That would never work. I think it's almost certain that there's going to be some sort of interactive game to play around the land. Just like with Mario. What I would guess is we'd combine Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom with Web Slingers, the Spider-Man ride, and basically Pokemon Go. So you'd have this virtual interactive Pokemon catching experience where you'd walk up to some sort of screen element in the land, and a Pokemon would show up in front of you, and you'd be able to, like, pretend to, like, throw a Pokeball towards the screen, and then you'd watch the Pokeball hit the Pokemon, you'd see if you catch the Pokemon. And maybe, you know, have, like, 15 or so of those around the land, let's say, to give people this incentive to really spend a lot of time and explore. I think that could be really fun. This would almost certainly require some sort of accessory, like the power-up band, so that there's, you know, something to profit off of here for Universal, but I can't really think of what that accessory would be, because the obvious idea is you'd have guests buy, like, a Pokeball, and then when you have that, you can throw at the Pokemon, but I fear that guests would actually throw the Pokeball, and it would either, you know, break the Pokeball, it would break the screens or something. You don't want guests actually throwing items, so it'd have to be, like, doing a wristband again feels almost repetitive, but it feels like a good way to do that, to just have some computer be able to verify, oh, this person is paid, but don't have people having physical items that they hold, because then they'll actually throw it, and property damage and guest injuries, really. That's what I imagine a Pokemon land could look like. And we already know where that would go in Japan. So let's look to the other two resorts where I think could get it, which is Orlando and Hollywood. Universal UK, again, it's a massive question mark because the concept art, it doesn't show Mario, it doesn't show anything that looks like Pokemon. And I believe, I've heard Universal kind of wants to keep that park unique from Orlando so that guests from the East Coast of the US would still want to go to Universal UK, like target market, like people in the UK would still want to go to Universal Orlando. So you could have both coexist and not devour each other. So it's possible that, like, if Universal Orlando is going to get Nintendo stuff, Universal UK might not. But for the rest of this video, for everything I talk about, consider Universal UK just a big, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to play out. So the obvious choice for Hollywood and Orlando is to replace The Simpsons. So much discussion has gone on about The Simpsons lands at Universal Orlando because the contract is allegedly set to expire around 2028, and The Simpsons is now owned by Disney. So it's kind of expected that Universal's probably not going to be able to renew that. And both parks have a Simpsons area. Both Hollywood and Universal Studios Florida have a very similar Simpsons land, where in theory you could tweak both. You could tweak the land cons because they take up different space, and put the same thing in both if you wanted to. If it's coming to Hollywood, I'm pretty sure you're going to need to build a new ride building, no matter what. And I think Simpsons is the most obvious choice for a replacement. Assuming that this contract is going to expire, which I think it's pretty safe to say that it probably is, and I wouldn't be surprised if Disney doesn't let them renew it. I can see a world where Simpsons doesn't close in 2028 or 2027 or anywhere around there. But let's just assume that The Simpsons is not long for the Universal parks. I think it is the perfect spot in Hollywood to put Pokemon, but I'm not sure if Hollywood getting Pokemon even really makes sense to me, because when I think about people talking about this Universal cross Nintendo stuff, I think about oversaturation. The same kind of thing that, in my opinion, has happened to the franchise we don't speak of. Almost every Universal park has an almost identical unnamed castle village land. The only one that doesn't is Singapore. And all of those lands have the exact same ride in them. Now, I'm heavily biased because I hate this franchise, but it just feels a little boring that, let's say I were to travel all the way to Universal Hollywood, just to be met by the exact same land that I've already seen in Orlando. That's just not very interesting. And I don't think Mario is different than that. It's a property I adore. I would go visit the Mario Land any chance that I get at any Universal park. But there are going to be people who don't care for the Mario Land and would feel the same boredom seeing it everywhere. And then you look at the Orlando parks with 3 lands based on the unnameable franchise, and it's just like, good lord, that feels like too much. Like, every park that you go to at that resort has a land themed to the same property. If you don't care for that property, if you're not a super fan of that property, I feel like you're gonna get sick of that. And it's just, if those 3 already feel like too much, in 3 separate parks, Mario and Pokemon in Hollywood feels like it's even more too much to me. I know Mario and Pokemon, they're different series, they're different franchises. It's not literally building the same franchise land twice, but they're both, you know, relatively all ages, video game based lands. And I feel that they will occupy a similar place in people's brains, because they do to me at least. And they are both very big series. They have general popularity among just I think the average person knows about Pokemon and Mario. I think it's possible that they could coexist in the same park. I just worry that it's too much. It's too much video games in one park. I think Universal Hollywood would just feel really weird with both of those things. But I think it's possible. I think it's very possible. For Universal Orlando, they're getting Pokemon. They are going to get this Pokemon attraction. They have kind of all but announced it, if you ask me. But I don't think it's going to go at Epic Universe. I've seen some people say they think it's going to be one of the expansion plots for Epic Universe. I don't think Pokemon will be. I think it's going to go to one of the other 2 parks. It's either Islands of Adventure or Universal Studios Florida. And if you ask me, I think Studios Florida is the better place to put it. Because you've got the Simpsons plot. You've also got the Fear Factor stage and Men in Black. You know, Men in Black is getting old. The Fear Factor stage is already closed. I love the Men in Black ride, but I think there's a very good possibility that could be where Pokemon goes. The Men in Black ride building could probably have Pokemon in it. Not sure if they would do it, but it's possible, and then the rest of the land could be built where the Fear Factor stage is. Oh geez, sorry. But current rumors are suggesting, however, that it's not going to go to Universal Studios Florida, and that it's going to go to Islands of Adventure. And it's going to replace the Lost Continent, which is... There are permits currently filed for Lost Continent's demolition. So that's going to become a site where things are happening very soon. And if they want Pokemon to be one of the next big things, it would be there, because they're already demolishing that. Something's going to go there. Personally, I think Studios Florida needs Pokemon more. I think that park really needs another big draw. And Pokemon's a really strong IP to bring people in. That park is a little dire when you look at the others, because it feels a little old. It feels a little outdated compared to the others. The others have so much new going on and rides that really, really age well. well, Universal Studios Florida, I feel is lacking that a bit. It doesn't have those big, hard-hitting rides. Like, honestly, most of Epic Universe. Islands of Adventure, you've got stuff like Spider-Man that seems like it's gonna last forever. People are gonna love that forever. You've got Velocicoaster. You've got the ones I don't want to talk about. You've got really big draws there. Universal Studios Florida, they're gonna get that. They're gonna get Fast and Furious Hollywood Drift. But I think it needs something else too. But honestly, other than for my worries about Lost Continent being where Pokemon goes, and that part of the park just becoming so crowded, and for, like, the business reasons of splitting up guests evenly, I don't care where it goes. It doesn't particularly matter. The land is probably going to be basically the same, just a different layout. Probably going to have the same stuff in it no matter where it goes. So the only reason I would put it in Universal Studios Florida is because I think it would make the park better. So that was a lot of Pokemon talk. We've been talking about Pokemon for a while. The reason I talk so much about Pokemon is because, if you ask me, Mario and Pokemon are the only Nintendo properties I think really fit the Universal parks. They're on a whole other tier compared to everything else Nintendo has. The public knows Pokemon, they know Mario. They're gonna appeal to more than just fans of those properties, existing video game fans. You know, Mario, people who haven't played Mario since the NES and the SNES, I think can still get something out of the Mario Land. I think there's still something to enjoy there, and I think Pokemon can be the same. There are a lot of other popular Nintendo franchises, but I think those two are the only ones that are obvious wins. But for fun, let's talk about those other Nintendo franchises, because there's still possibilities here. There are, and I think this gets a little more fun because we get to get into a lot more speculation and really daydreaming. But first, let's talk Luigi's Mansion, because the rumors have definitely gravitated towards Luigi's Mansion, and I think there is a very real possibility that we see an interactive ghost-catching ride as an expansion onto Super Nintendo World. Another warp pipe that would take you to, you know, the hill where the Gloomy Manor is in Dark Moon. Like, you'd walk into that courtyard, and then the queue could be, you know, you'd go through Egad's lab, you'd have Egad be the character who, like, appears on a screen and, like, babbles at the guests, kind of explaining what's going to happen on the ride. And then you have guests travel through all of these rooms with all of these ghost antics happening, and you try and help Luigi catch them all. And I know that's a very similar concept to Pokemon Snap and Minion Blast, but Epic Universe doesn't have an interactive dark ride yet, and I just think it would be fun to see Universal Creative kind of do their own version of a haunted mansion. I think that could be really fun. And the other big question is, of course, Zelda. For a long time, the internet was convinced this was going to be the Lost Continent. And yeah, thematically, that makes sense. The Lost Continent feels like it could be an easy overlay. You could take a lot of those existing buildings, a lot of those existing motifs, and put Zelda in there. I have a hard time being totally on board with Zelda, because I just don't think Zelda is as much of a mainstream cultural staple. That could change. You know, they've got a live-action movie coming, and Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, they did crazy numbers. Zelda is the most popular it's ever been, but I still think Pokemon and Mario are on another level. I think Zelda would appeal mainly to video game people. I think it might struggle to attract an audience outside of that. in the theme park space. But I really do think a Zelda land could be breathtaking, and I would love to see one. I know I'm not a big Zelda person, but I really do think that this could be something amazing. The route with something going for, like, the Twilight Princess look, with something more realism-focused, I think would make a lot of sense. It would potentially be the easier way to do it, maybe, but I would love to see something that really takes inspiration from Breath of the Wild. I would love to see the land split into 4, like, neighborhoods, I guess you'd call it, with the Gorons, the Zora, the Rito, and the Gerudo all having a section of the land, and Hyrule Castle would be the entrance to some sort of major attraction. I don't think there'd be any interactive element here, like the others. I think it would really want to have a beautiful and adventurous vibe to help fit Zelda. I think something interactive would make it feel a bit off. I think it would feel a little less serious, and I think a Zelda land kind of has to have a little bit of a serious tone to it. It's a little more mature of a series. It's something that you want to treat with a lot of respect. Adapting an open world game, if we're really going to go Breath of the Wild, to a ride, it does feel kind of awkward, but I think something taking guests around Hyrule, having encounters with all of the champions, and the finale being, like, watching Link battle Calamity Ganon, I think that could be really cool. I think this would just be, like, a fairly traditional boat ride, not that patented concept that was rumored to be for Zelda, where, like, the boat would get picked up partway through. I think it's gonna be a traditional boat ride. Maybe it would have a drop. I don't think so personally. Or it would be something maybe a little more advanced, kind of like the Pirates ride at Shanghai Disney. But I don't necessarily think we're going to see anything super complicated if we get Zelda. I think it would just be a fairly normal boat ride that would focus really on just everything you're seeing being incredible. Where this would actually go at Universal Orlando, I don't know. Because let's assume Pokemon's going into Lost Continent, like the rumors say. Maybe the Men in Black and Fear Factor area? Maybe it could kind of add on or be adjacent to Super Nintendo World? I'm not exactly sure. But despite how I feel about oversaturation and thinking Nintendo in every park at Universal Orlando could be too much, I am admittedly rooting for a Zelda land. I would love to see this happen. I think it could be really cool. Now, for all the other Nintendo franchises, I don't think we're going to see full-on lands. I don't think we're going to see big e-ticket attractions for any of this stuff. I think it'd be a stretch. It'd be a big stretch. But let's have some fun. Let's talk about just some of the things that I've thought about for how these Nintendo properties could fit into a theme park space. And Kirby is one of those franchises that I think there's a lot that you could do with it that's just not a full big attraction. I can imagine stuff like a little play area space with stuff from like the franchise history. You know, I'm thinking like the Beanstalk from Triple Deluxe, the Lore Star Cutter, that sort of thing. And I think, obviously, you'd want a Kirby meet and greet. You'd want somewhere where you could have guests meet and take pictures with Kirby, and I think Kirby's house is kind of the perfect backdrop for that. And I would love to see, you know, Waddle Dee, Meta Knight, and King Dedede as well. I think they're all iconic Kirby characters that would really work as a meet and greet. And there's this thought in my head of like a snack stand or like a little quick service dining thing called Gourmet Race. And you could do dishes based on like the Maxim tomato, the Invincibility lollipop. It feels perfect. Pikmin are already in Super Nintendo World. So they already have some of a presence. And the thought of doing something like a Bug's Land again, but doing it with Pikmin, it's really cute sounding. Just having like an area with a lot of charmingly themed attractions for like a younger audience with that sort of shrunk down very small theming would really fit Pikmin. And sell fruit juice too. That's all I've got for Pikmin. I have dreamed a lot about ideas of how to do something Metroid related in the parks, because of course I have. And to me, I think Metroid, if it's gonna do anything, it is a great Halloween Horror Nights house. And I know Horror Nights is a little more focused on the kind of horror that's like jump scares and that sort of thing. But the idea of taking inspiration from stuff like Metroid Fusion and Metroid Dread and having this maze where you're always hearing like the footsteps of the SAX, and like right behind you you're hearing like the noise that the ME makes, or like you're seeing like the red light that shines on their head, I guess. Like, you catch glimpses of, like, Metroids floating by. And it would kind of just be there, sort of to just freak you out. That, obviously, stuff is around you, but you can't necessarily catch a great glimpse of it. And the maze, you make your way through this Galactic Federation facility of some kind. And the way that my brain goes to the finale, this would never work in reality. But you'd have guests walk into, like, the end of the maze would be this room themed to be, like, a very dark version of that freezer from Metroid Fusion, where you see the giant frozen Ridley. And you'd have guests, like, kind of trapped in this room, sort of. And you'd watch Ridley, like, start to, like, break free of the ice. And prepare to, like, slash at the guests. Before, like, a door opens and guests can run and escape from him. That feels like such a show-stopping moment, but I don't know if that would ever work in, like, a Halloween Horror Nights environment. But it's such a cool visual to me, and I think that could be really amazing. I don't think Metroid is a popular enough franchise to have this sort of thing happen, but if they did Metroid in any capacity as a Horror Nights house, no matter how they did it, I think it could be really cool, and I would be genuinely really sad that Horror Nights is not something that I could handle, because I would love to see what they would put together. We're getting sort of into franchises where I've seen people discuss this sort of thing, and when I think about these franchises, I don't really see how they could do anything substantial in the theme park space. One of those is Animal Crossing, because it's massively popular. It's super popular. But I can only think of, like, two possible things that you could do, and that would be the Roost Cafe and, like, some character meet and greets with, like, Tom Nook and, like, Abel and Sable and that sort of thing. That's just the only thing that I can think of for Animal Crossing. I don't know how you'd tie that into anything. It just doesn't feel like there's enough there. Animal Crossing is massively popular, I just don't think it works in the theme park space. I can imagine, like, Star Tours, but it's Star Fox. But that will literally never happen. And I've seen some people bring up the idea of Splatoon Because, again, it's extremely popular. It's a relatively modern franchise, too. But, see, the thing is that you've got the exterior. You've got the land. Because you could do Inkopolis Plaza or Inkopolis Square. You could have all the shopping that you want and food locations and that sort of thing. But once you get to the actual ride, like you go into Inkopolis Tower, I cannot think of what would be past there. I just don't see how you could adapt Splatoon to an attraction and have it make any sense. The only thing that I can think of is just, like, a paintball arena, and that would be really stupid. And at this point, I think I've exhausted basically everything that remotely makes sense to me. But if you're the kind of person who thinks about this sort of stuff like me, if you've got ideas from pipe dreams to something a little more grounded, feel free to share them in, like, a comment or something. I would love to see what other ideas folks have about this sort of thing. I think it's kind of a fascinating concept. You know, there's so many things that could be done, and I would love to see what other people think about. So, to close out the video, here's the outcome that I think makes the most sense. This is what I would call, like, my personal sort of prediction. You're gonna get Pokemon opens at Universal Japan. It's gonna have some sort of interactive dark ride. There's gonna be an interactive Pokemon catching game, like food and shopping and that sort of thing. And I think that is going to go over to the Lost Continent. I think it's going to go into Islands of Adventure. I don't think Hollywood is gonna get Pokemon. I just don't think that's gonna happen. I do think Epic Universe at some point is going to get a Luigi's Mansion ride. I think it's a really good fit. I think Epic Universe needs more capacity. It's an indoor ride. It fits really well into Epic Universe's master plan right now. I think we will see Luigi's Mansion in the Universal Parks. If we get Zelda, and that's a big if, I think it's either going to be adjacent to the existing Super Nintendo world, and it would take up like half of the expansion plot, so there's still space for something else to go there. I don't think Zelda would be the only thing in that space. Or, I think it would replace Men in Black and Fear Factor. I think they'd want a bigger space to do Zelda. I don't think they would just do it in The Simpsons. I think The Simpsons is going to be, like, Wicked or something. I think that's what they'll do there. Yeah, and that's it.